And we're back, and it's COMP1073. That's client-side scripting here at Georgian College for the winter 2016 semester. We want to talk about a couple things today, and actually, let me bring that back up. The one thing I do want to ask you is a bit of, I want to take a little poll with you guys. We'll do a quick little poll. So we're going to make it so like, what editor or IDE, right? Integrated development environment, do you prefer to use? Right? And we'll just kind of, and this for this course, obviously, is what I'm asking. So is it Visual Studio Code, right? Which is what I'm kind of showing you. You don't have to use Visual Studio Code. Maybe brackets, which is another popular choice. And of course, there's other ones like Visual Studio, which you can totally use. 2013, 2015. And maybe there's other ones like, some people like to use Dreamweaver, right? For whatever reason, people want to use Dreamweaver. There's other ones like WebStorm, right? WebStorm is the other one. I think it's spelled WebStorm. And we'll make another one, maybe another category, something else. Let's see if how many people fall into the other category. So, bunch of choices here. Let's create this little poll. And to answer the poll, what you're going to do is you're going to, I'm going to make it live here. You're going to go to pollev.com/learn, or you can text as an alternative learn to 37607, right? So let's see what your results are looking like. So Visual Studio Code, brackets, Visual Studio. Let's see how it looks. Other, we got a bunch of others, right? I'm asking for a reason. I also want to find out from you guys, you know, when it comes to the stuff that we're using, if I'm on the same page with everybody, because it's going to make a difference, right? It's going to make a difference with how we do stuff going forward. Now, I'm glad that most of you are looking like you're following along and you're using Visual Studio Code. You don't have to. Like, if you prefer another text editor of whatever you want to use, brackets or something else, you can certainly use something else instead of using brackets or sorry, the Visual Studio Code that I'm showing you. And the reason for that is because you're the developer, right? So you have to use whatever tool makes you comfortable. I'm just presenting a tool that's, did you get on yet? I'll give you a few more minutes, right? Again, this is just a, you know, what you prefer to use kind of poll. It's not known, and I see that nobody's using Visual Studio 2013, 2015. It's actually a really cool tool, right? Visual Studio 2013, 2015 is like, I mean, again, it's like 70 million lines of code. It's like the big brother of Visual Studio Code, and it can do a lot of stuff. It's like crazy, you know, crazy powerful, and you can do many things with it that you can't do with the other things, especially when it comes to Microsoft products. If you want to build things with C#, or if you're going to use ASP.NET, that kind of thing. It also does JavaScript pretty well. The one thing it does not that great on for Visual Studio Code and is PHP. Not really a lot of great support for PHP. WebStorm and PHP Storm, again, is another product line that people use. And I'm curious to see what other, there's 18% of people use other products, like maybe that you use Notepad++, or you're using some other things, Atom, or you know, some other kind of text editor, Coda, something else when you're doing your web stuff. That's totally cool. And again, it doesn't matter to me as long as when you present your assignments, you know, they kind of do what they're supposed to do, right? So it's up to you. Okay, so there's that one. And the big question for me that I want to ask is, let's do one more. We'll do another poll here. Here's the big question. How comfortable are you with Git and GitHub? How about this? I don't know anything about it. I'll put it out there. Why not, right? I kind of know what I'm doing. I'm good. Like, means like you're good, you know how to do everything. How about this? I'm a master of the universe, right? No problem. How about that? And then we'll just go to the next one, this one. Now, the reason why I'm asking this question, I know it's kind of funny. It's kind of it's a litmus test for me to understand, are we doing a good job? Are you getting it? I'm good. I'm good. I don't know anything about it. That's bad. If you don't know anything about GitHub, that's terrible. People are just joking with me, I'm sure. But let's see how many of those I get. I kind of know what I'm doing, and if for the most part, if that's how you feel you're in, that means we have to practice more. Part of it is practicing. I've done several videos now with you and some troubleshooting on getting you guys set up. And if that's the majority of the class, and that's what I'm hearing, that means that I'm going to slow down. When I do the GitHub thing again, I'll keep on showing it over and over again, right? I'm seeing smiles in the back of the room, which means I need to slow down and keep doing it, right? Yeah?
I think if from the majority of conversations that I've had with other people in the classes, we have our account set up. We know how to add a repository. We kind of get the idea of where things are going. It's just the commands, like the git and init, and then the next step. And even though it does walk you through it even on the page, I think it's just an uncomfortable feeling in between.
We'll have to do more. That's
all
what I'm saying.
Set up, we're ready to go. It's just repetition, I guess.
Yeah, we'll have to do it more and more. And I'll slow down around that place. And I know that people have come to me with different questions saying, I don't know, how do I get from here to here? I've done this piece in GitHub, but how do I do the next step? So we'll do a little bit of that today. I mean, I'm not going to focus on GitHub anymore, but in terms of setup. But what we'll do is I'll step through it, slowly, right, with you guys, so that you guys, because obviously, I mean, I think there's still people. There's one person who's a master of the universe. It must be Ari. You're a master of the universe. Is that you? Yeah, we'll see who it is, right? Anyways, oh, it's gone. Someone let's take it up here. But I deny that, right? Okay, let's get out of this one. So, I mean, again, these are little silly polls, but for me, it's important because I kind of get an idea of where you guys stand on this one. Yeah, we'll shut this down now. They're going to keep on doing this. All right. And again, you can, by the way, people do the, the cell phone thing and the computer thing, and they try and figure, and they text and stuff like that too, right? Yeah, it's all wrong. Especially if I leave it too long. If I leave it too long, then the results are just, that they're just nutty, right? But, anyways, let's get to the meat and bones of this thing. So let's kick off Visual Studio Code. So I'm launching Visual Studio Code like I did for the first time. And as an example, and remember how we start off. Whenever we start off a new project with Visual Studio Code, I want to start it off kind of from a new folder, right? And again, remember, this course is not about HTML, not really, and CSS. We're primarily focusing on JavaScript here, right? So we're going to connect HTML and CSS and all that stuff to our project. And I've kind of shown how to build the project before really quickly, and I'll do it again, yet another time to see it, right? And we'll set up a GitHub repository again, right? Because you guys are just asking, Tom, we still don't quite get it. I'm not quite good, kind of thing. I'm not a master of the universe yet, right? I want to get you guys all there. So let's do this thing. And again, we have Rich around to help if you have a problem. So let's follow the steps. I'm using here Visual Studio Code, but you can use any editor you like I said, to get this done. So I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop. You can create it in any place you want, all right? So the new folder is important because this is our project folder, okay? So again, setup. And let's do, the name of the folder, which is COMP1073. And again, we're going to go lesson 3, right? Which is what we're going to do, right? COMP1073, lesson 3. And we're going to take this folder for Visual Studio Code and drop it in. You could also point to this folder if you're using another editor. Brackets actually is very similar to this. So I'm going to drag and drop it in, right? All right, it's an empty folder. Now there's 2 ways you can add subfolders to this folder. We need to create a folder structure to for progressive enhancement, which are the behavior layer, the presentation layer, the structure layer, right? Not necessarily in that order, right? So we need those 3 layers, right? And in order for us to do that, it helps us by organizing our code like we've seen before. So let's do that with different folders. And again, here in Visual Studio Code, I'm going to kind of hover over the little folder icon and click New Folder. That's one way of doing it. And I'm going to put in my contents folder, right? So content. And I'm just matching up what it looks like for Visual Studio. Another way to add another folder in Visual Studio Code, again, just as a review, is right-click and add a new folder. We're going to call this scripts. All right, so a couple of folders. Remember, our content folder is going to be where we keep any of our CSS. So I'm going to right-click, and I'm going to have a new file, and we're going to have our local app.css that we're going to set up here, right? Inside our scripts folder, we're going to right-click on our script folder, and we're going to say, new file, and we're going to add in our app.js, right, which is our JavaScript files. We've got that basic structure. In this example, I'm not going to add in things like Bootstrap like we've done before yet. Okay, we're going to talk to it in a second, right? Okay, so we've got these two folders and a couple of files inside the folder structure, and they're inside, they're encapsulated or contained in the folders, so that would be organize our code. Okay, that's what we're using it for. Outside of these two folders, I'm clicking away, and I'm going to go to the main folder itself. I'm going to click this new file icon, right? And in here, I'm going to, let's try that again. It's going to go in the wrong place, not in content. I want to create an index.html file, right? So there's an index.html file. Again, the index.html file is our manifest, right? Whenever we write JavaScript, whenever we want to create any kind of web page, everything links together in our index.html file, all right? Now, this is for front-end technology. For back-end technologies, which you're going to see in future courses, you may not need an index.html file if you're using back-end stuff to tie in your JavaScript or your logic, right? But for our example, and for most of the stuff that you're going to be doing, is we tie everything into our index.html file. And the way we do that, again, just like I asked you on the quiz, is by using a script tag and making a link to our JavaScript files. So we need a structure. And as I pointed out to you in previous classes, we'll do it again. One place to go is Bootstrap to get the structure. I'm not going to use Bootstrap necessarily to create a Bootstrap file or anything like that. But I like to go here because it's a quick and dirty place to get it. So getbootstrap.com. I'm going to click on Getting Started, right? And somewhere down the page, a bit down the page, there is a template that you're going to see. Here's my basic template, right, for Bootstrap. So this is not the first or last time you've seen this. I'm going to click on copy the whole thing, right? I don't need it all. It's easier for me to delete stuff than to add things, to be honest with you, by hand. So I'm just going to copy this. And I'm going to go into Visual Studio Code here in my index.html and paste it, right? So now I've got a bunch of stuff here, right? I'm going to make this a little bit bigger so you guys can all see it. I've got my doc type, which is HTML. They've already added in an HTML tag for the editor HTML node with my language is English, right? Which is cool. My head tag. And inside my head tag is all my control. I like to think about this as the control of my document. And what I want to do here is I want to get rid of, let's just get rid of some of these comments just because you don't need them. The top three meta tags are they're useful for controlling the way we do things on the web. Character set tells the browser what character set we're using, so reduces some of the errors we might get. And from a compatibility perspective, we use UTF-8. The next two, one is specific to the new IE and Edge browsers, and the next one is the viewport tag that we use for mobile devices and for different viewport sizes. So when we kind of make our web applications for various screen sizes, right? So that's like three. So those are the three that kind of come with Bootstrap. Let's rename this thing like we've done before to COMP, if I can spell, 1073, just to match up with what we're doing, and this is lesson 3. And then we got a bunch of other stuff in here. I'm just going to kill it, like all this stuff inside of our title tag. Again, it's easier for me to erase, and I'll kill this stuff too because we're not going to use this in a second. Okay, cool. So I'm using this template as a really quick way of writing it instead of typing it by hand. Again, you could type it by hand if you want to. We're going to make the title of our H1. We're going to say, we'll say welcome to lesson 3, right, for this one. And we're not going to kind of put anything else in here yet. We will. But what I do need is a link to my app.css, right? That's the thing that's going to govern all of our CSS. And the way we do that, of course, is if I open this up again so we can see our structure. If I was going to make a link to our app.css, I want to put it typically underneath the title as a structure. And I want to create a link tag, right? and it's going to give us, we have to kind of put in the link in terms of our relative path. So it's going to be content/app.css. Now this stuff should not at all be new to you. It should be something we're just reviewing, right? Just to give a bit of a comment, let's put in, this is our CSS section, right? So we kind of do that all the time when we kind of start splitting off our document. And on the bottom over here, we're going to talk about our JavaScript section, which we haven't done yet. And again, HTML comments are written like this, so JavaScript section. And I kind of partition it off like that. All right, and underneath our JavaScript section, this is where I want to link to our JavaScript file. Remember I asked on the test, the little quiz there, what's the best way? And really it is an external document. I haven't talked about linking it in, locally for you guys, and I'm not going to. I'm not going to talk about linking things locally. I don't never want you guys to do it. I never want you guys to use inline JavaScript for anything, for any reason. You don't need to, except when we do some attribute stuff. Any kind of, when we talk about event handling, it might be a position where we actually have some kind of attribute events that we're going to put in line. But that's the only time that we'd be using them, and then we'd move away from that into actually making references with variables later on. But that's the only time. If you see it in your code, if you see JavaScript inline in your document, there's got to be a reason for it. Sometimes it's because it's an older document, right? Could be that. Someone's copied code from the web. Could be that, right? They don't know what they're doing. It could be that. And it could be from a preference perspective, especially if you've got a tutorial, you want to put it all in one document. A lot of people do that too. It's not because they prefer that way of doing things. It's just in terms of portability sometimes, that's why you might see it. It's not the best way though, especially when you're building a larger scale application. To scale your application, you build, and especially from a separation of concerns like we talked about, you always link to an external file, okay, or files. All right, so let's do this. We're going to use a script tag to do that, and inside our script tag, the first script tag here, the opening tag, we're going to, we're going to use our source attribute, and we're going to say we're going to link to it to our scripts. And notice inside of our scripts we have our app.js. So we go scripts, and then app.js, right? App.js. Okay, so we've linked to it. Everything's good, and you might think you're done. Things to think about are these, right? If I have a line of executable code that's inside of my JavaScript file, which I don't have anything yet. By the way, again, from a comments perspective for JavaScript, there's two different comments. What are they? What are the two comment styles for JavaScript? 2 forward slashes. So we can say this is our main document, main JavaScript document. I can spell again. Right? And then the other way to do it is we've seen before, which is the / star and a multi-line split * / which kind of allows me to do multi-line comments, right? For your assignment that you'll be getting later today, right? I'm going to ask you to add comments in your code to explain sometimes what you're doing. And it doesn't matter which style you use as long as the comments exist. There's also a rule about over-commenting. We don't want to comment things to death, eh? Like, there's actually two camps about comments. One of them is, you comment where you need to, kind of thing. And then there's another one that says, don't comment at all. Some people, there's actually developers that are like that, and they say your code should comment itself. I kind of disagree with that camp. I think, yeah, your code should kind of be visible and, readable, human readable in some sense. But there might be some pieces of code that you're writing, especially if you're writing a special function or something that's not, even for a regular person, not really apparent what you're doing. So I recommend putting comments, especially around method headers, function headers, or code that maybe isn't immediately apparent. If it's not immediately apparent to you, comment it, right? But I don't need you to comment every line of code in a for loop. This is a for loop. Don't do that. That would be like silly, right? You can see it's a for loop. If it's kind of apparent by itself, the answer is don't comment. It's only comment something when you need to, and make sure you use contextual variable names, right, in your code. Okay, so a couple of comment styles. By the way, I put another PowerPoint presentation up on Blackboard. So now there's a total of 5 that I put up on Blackboard. So the first 3 are kind of an intro to JavaScript and kind of concepts around progressive enhancement. Last week, we really, that one I put up last week was all around the DOM and DOM scripting. We're going to talk about that a little bit today. And then there's a new one that I've just put up around data, right? Data storage and how we store data in our app. And we're going to talk about that more. So those two things, those two topics I want to kind of handle today. They're not that complex, but I want to talk about them. So we talked about variable names, and in your test I asked you, when you declare a variable in JavaScript, you use the var keyword, right? Now we also talked about how you don't have to use the var keyword, right? But that's to your peril. I don't recommend it. I also asked about last week that you always use strict. I think this is a good practice. So if you use strict when you use your JavaScript, right, it helps us troubleshoot any kind of weird stuff that's going on in our code, right? So use strict, that's kind of like almost the first line you should put in your JavaScript code, all your JavaScript code. So again, variables, this is the variable declaration. The great thing about Visual Studio Code, if I hover over a keyword like this, it tells me what the keyword is all about. So if we declare our variables, it's almost like I'm giving a list of variables for those people who are not great with programming about stuff I want to use. For example, we talked about having my my name. So if I have a username, right, and I can initialize my username in different ways, right? I can, with my equal sign, that's the assignment operator, and whenever I use my equal sign with a variable, it's almost like I'm pouring stuff into it, right? My variable is an empty container, my equal sign is the assignment operator, and anything on the right side of the equal sign, that value, whether it's a literal or another variable, I'm taking that value that's coming from that other container or the literal, and I'm pouring it into the variable name. So here's my variable name username, and I'm saying as an example, this might be equal to, your name. Put your name in there, Tom. My name's Tom, right? With the semicolon. So that kind of loads up the variable as an example with some data, right? So username Tom, right? Makes sense. We did this kind of last time. This is just kind of a review, and we have a var. We're also going to declare our age. Notice I'm putting them on different lines here, like this. My age, just a number. I'll just put it as 30. That's not true, but you can put it in there like that again. And so we have two numbers. So one, if I hover over this, you can see that the data type that JavaScript is seeing is string, but there is no data types in JavaScript in terms of strict data typing. I can't like declare that username is a string, right? We use something called type inference, right? So where JavaScript kind of trying to figure out when the compiler looks at, or the interpreter looks at the code, it says, I'm assigning a string type to a variable. Must be that variable is a string. That's what it is. That's what type inference is all about, right? And same thing here with age. If you notice, if I hover over age, it says age is a number, right? Now it depends on the kind of IDE or text editor. You may not get this code hinting if you hover over. Visual Studio Code does give it to you for JavaScript, which is kind of cool, and that's why I'm using it. So again, there's two parts. There's the variable name, and on the right side of the equal sign, there's the literal, which in this case is a string literal. Literal means that it's not a variable. It's actually a value that I'm putting on the right side. In this particular case, it's a string literal in quotations, right? And on this side, it's a numeric literal, right? So 30 is a numeric literal that's being assigned to the variable age, right? Again, this is kind of, programming 101. But I want to mention these things because when I talk about variable name, I'm talking about this side. When I talk about string literal or literal, I'm talking about the other side. And that usually could mean something that's written this way. But what if I do something like this down here? And this is the question this is review, right? So I've got my username, right? And then can I make it equal to age? Well, the answer is yeah, you can, right? But is it right? That's the other question. And the answer is no, it's not, right? First of all, it doesn't make any sense, right? If I say username, it is equal to age, that doesn't work. That doesn't, human readability we talked about just now, right? How can how can I assign an age to a username? Typically, that doesn't make any sense, right? That's one. So the variables clash right away. Doesn't make any sense. Second thing is the values are different, right? One's a string, so my username is expecting a string to be assigned, and then the other one is a number. And if you notice, it gives me a little underline here in Visual Studio Code. Some other editors won't give you any kind of code hinting at all. No code coloring, no code hinting, and say, okay, go ahead. And for JavaScript, it would be perfectly legal to do this, by the way. So if I hover over it, it says, hey, the number is not assignable to type string. It's not going to stop you from running this thing, though, right? Okay, cool. So we talked about that. We talked about that. That's not a cool thing to do. That's not a very nice thing to do, right? The other kind of variable types, we talk data types, right, is a Boolean. Very common one is another one is a Boolean type, right? Who knows what a Boolean type is? Everyone? Does everyone not know what a Boolean type is? I think it's a better way of it. So Boolean only stores true, false, right? So if I say, you know, bar is hungry, right? Right? Is hungry is equal to true. Tom's hungry, right? As an example. So I've noticed how I created my variable. Usually with a Boolean, I kind of make it as if it's a question, right? For example, is touching, is hungry, you know, that kind of stuff. Is grounded. I usually kind of phrase it that way for myself because a Boolean should have some kind of meaning behind it as well, the variable name, right? Remember, the two options for Booleans are true and false, right? So again, this is just, you know, basic variable declaration 101 kind of thing, right? True and false. Okay, cool. So, I mean, I've got a couple of variable names. And what we haven't seen yet, and we haven't talked about too much, is arrays, right? And this is where notoriously students go crazy with arrays, right? They hate arrays. They want to punch their computer, right? Please don't punch your computer. Again, I told you before, right? They don't understand. They look up 20 different sources to understand what arrays are. And they, for the life of them, hate arrays. They never want to see arrays in their life. If they never see an array again, they don't even hear the word array, they're happy, right? I'm mentioning this because it's a bit of, there's some stuff around arrays to understand them. So first of all, what is an array? And for those people who don't know, again, I'm assuming that you don't know what an array is. So if you do know what an array is and you're very well schooled at that, please forgive me. I'm doing this because for the people that don't know, and there are going to be people out there that won't put up their hand and tell me that they don't know what an array is or how to use an array, and that's okay. I'm going to assume right now you don't know. So let's talk about arrays for a second. So far we've talked about variables, right? And variables are just containers for data. That's what I want you to think about them. They're named containers. I'm creating a name for the container that I'm going to store some data inside. And I've got here 3 containers. Right, there's 3 containers here that a username that stores a Tom, a string, an age that stores a 30, right, which is the variable, a number, right? And then is hungry, which stores 2 possible values, true or false, right? And I'm storing true. So there's 3 containers, 3 different variable types, and they're all storing something. Okay, cool. An array is almost like a bunch of related variables all strung together, all right? And I think a great way to doing that is to draw it out. Right, so I'm going to pull up one of my favorite design programs. I like using Fireworks, right? I know some people like using Photoshop or whatever. Fireworks is kind of a lightweight program that's kind of gone by the wayside for Adobe over the last several years. They've kind of removed it from their regular offerings, and it's still sitting at CS6. It's still included in Adobe CC. If you're going to download it and include that that suite as an example, as for students, there's a great discount. But and it's a cool program. Again, you get Dreamweaver and other things in there as well. But they don't have, first Fireworks is kind of a lightweight a graphic editor for me. So I'm going to use some boxes here to illustrate this. So I've got this. Actually, what I'll do is I'll make a box for the background. So let me just do that again. We'll click off a new file here, and we'll make it so that the background on the canvas is transparent white. Okay, so I've got a box. Here's my box, and this is my container. This is my variable, right? So I've got a container. And I want to put a value in the container. So here's my value. I'm just going to type in, you know, the number or the string Tom. There's my Tom value, right? And right now there's a container, right? And Tom. Tom is the literal. The container is unnamed. There's no name for the container. So I got to name it. If I don't name the container, I don't really have a variable. I can't reference it in any way. So that's what I have to do with a variable. So we're going to call this username, just like we said before. So there's my username. And username is really is what we're saying. We're kind of making a name for the container. It's just a box that stores data, right? And so if I want to put Tom inside the box, I use the equal sign. So I say Tom now is inside the box. There we go. So there's my container, and it's got Tom inside, right? Variable. Well, think about an array as a bunch of variables like this, all strung together, like I said, but they're related. And usually what we want to do, and I say usually because in JavaScript, it kind of breaks the rules of arrays. You want to use the same data types here, all strung together to make your array, right? So let me just put that together. So I'm going to kind of get this box here. And instead of username, right, we're going to rename this array. And usually we want to call it something plural, like usernames, right? I'll keep that Tom out here for a second, and we'll make some other ones. So I'm going to kind of copy these boxes. So I'm going to kind of put another box in here and maybe another box, you know, and we're going to put them kind of strung together. They may not be, you know, all together right now. I'm going to make, I don't know, a few boxes. There's one more. So if we can make me fit one more in here, and wherever that is that I copied and pasted. Yeah, there it is. Okay, good. So we got a few boxes here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and let me just like move that all up so we can see that. Okay, cool. So we got a few boxes, and notice that I've put them all under the usernames heading. So all these boxes are now associated with a structure called usernames. Don't think about these boxes as individual containers yet. I want you to think about these boxes as one big container that has a few compartments. That's more of a better way to think about it. And in the first compartment, right, I'm going to put Tom, right? And I'm going to put some other usernames in here as well. Let's kind of do, you know, another one. Since we have some guests, we'll use the guest names, right? So we'll have another one called Rich, if I can actually type properly in this thing. There's Rich, right? And forgive me if I'm going a little slow. I just want to make sure that everyone kind of understands what's going on. Here's Rich. That's a string. And you know what? Let's put Angie because she's here, because she's helping out too, right? Because that's important. And you know what? I don't know. We'll make another name too. Why not? Yeah, I'll use the random name. All right, we'll use Margot because you know she's in the front. And what the hell, right? Here's Margot. So I've got all these kind of different usernames. No, notice Margot is just barely fitting because her name is like a little bigger than the rest of them, right? Not on purpose, by the way. It's all fantasy, right? But let's just look at this for a second. So you've got a bunch of names and there's different containers. But notice that I only have one array name or one name for one identifier for this big container called an array with different compartments, right? So I can do this. I can create a structure like this in JavaScript or in other languages. And usually what we want to do is we want to be able to refer to these elements here. So there's the first one, the second one, the third one, fourth one. And normally you'd be forgiven to think, if you've never done any programming, that you'd reference this as the first cell. This is the first cell or container, if you will, or compartment in the array. And what I'm going to do here is, again, I'm going to kind of type the cell number here. Normally you would say, well, this is number 1, right? And again, if you've never done programming before, you'd be forgiven to think this is proper, right? Yes, this is the first cell, if you will, but in JavaScript and in other languages that are C influenced, we always start counting with a 0, right? So C 0-based counting. So we start with 0. So this is the 0th one, if you will, right? The 0th, that's actually correct. And if I go to this level here, let's make this the first one. So this is number 1, cell 1. So this is cell 0, this is cell 1. As an example, right? These are important distinctions. And this is cell 2. We're just going to put this over here. Notice how, I get some really cool help from Fireworks to help me align these things nicely. But that's just another story altogether. And let's just put in this into cell 3. So cell 1, 2, 3. Okay, cool. So, and the reason why I'm putting these numbers in play here, so I've got my username, Tom, is 0, and I want to, usernames 1 is Rich, and usernames 2 is Anju. Oh, notice I'm saying it. Usernames 3 is Margot, right? And these are the cell numbers. Now, to reference these things, there's a bit of notation when I want to reference, when I want to get data from an array or set data in an array space. If I want to set data, I want to change Tom, the compartment 0. If I want to change compartment 0, now it's containing Tom, right? I want to change it to something else, I need some notation for that. And it's usually the square brackets. So instead of typing 0, right, I'm going to type square brackets 0, right? And it's going to be combined with the usernames identifier. So I'm going to take the usernames identifier, and I'm going to kind of reference square brackets 0. So I'm going to say usernames, right? And it's going to be square brackets. I'm going to make that so it looks nicer. There we go. So if you notice, if I do the same thing for all the other ones, so I'm not going to put the usernames in there, but just assume that usernames and square brackets and in the middle 0 is the way we reference each of these compartments. This would be, obviously, this would be 1, and this is the square brackets. Just assume that there's usernames ahead of this, square brackets 2, and so on, right? And square brackets 3. Okay, cool, right? So if I want to assign another value, I'm just going to take another one of these, and we'll make another one. We'll call something that's something that's like Mike or something like that. Like another name, Mike. Right? And I want to kind of replace Tom with Mike, right? What I would do is I would say, well, username 0 then in these square brackets, just like this, the same notation is equal to, we use the equals operator, Mike. And then what happens is Tom goes out of there and Mike goes in there. And Tom is not there anymore. Don't worry about it. Actually, let's put it off screen. There you go. It's off screen. It's not there, right? This is what it really looks like now. So what I've done is I can directly access the array by using this notation here. And what these are is the indices, or each one of these is an index. Because these arrays, any array in JavaScript, C#, Java, other C-influenced languages like C, C++, and so on, they're all zero-based indexing is what it's called, right? So again, we start counting at 0, and I use this notation, usernames, the name of the array, usernames, with the square brackets and the index number to assign, right, or to read from the array. So I can read and write to the array by using this notation, okay? Anyone not know about this? Anyone have never seen this before? It's okay if you haven't. It's good if you put your hand up because then I can kind of gear. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to ask a little poll again for those people who are afraid to put their hand up because you're embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed. It's better to tell me you don't know than for you to tell me that you know and you don't really know. Okay, so cool. So stuff that you've covered before, right? Other languages, I have to declare the array in some way, right? In other languages, I have to say when I declare my variable, right? How do I declare my array? So here's what the array would look like, but I need to declare this in some way in JavaScript. And I'm going to use the var keyword, just like we did for regular things. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code for a second, right? With arrays. I'm going to go in here, and we're going to say var, and we're going to say usernames, right? Here's my usernames, right? Array. And typically, there's a couple ways to do this. I could do this. I could say, well, here's my array, right? One way of seeing arrays, right? Well, this is kind of a weird way to do it, right? Because when you look at an array structure like this, you're like, hold on, there's some square brackets. How's that an array, right? Well, in JavaScript, this is the one way to see it. Anyone know of another way? There's one more other way that's very common that you might see arrays being initialized, right? Or I want to create a new array. Anyone? What, Ari? Ari, do you know another way of creating an array or declaring an array other than this for JavaScript? A what? Oh, actually, like put in values, initialize the array right away. That's the initializer syntax, right? Well, let's talk about how do I create an array? How to declare an array that's empty, right? Is there another way of doing this? This is just an empty array. That's what it means, right? Yes.
Usernames equals new array.
Let's try it. See what it does. So if I say new, right? And if I put in array, do I put it lowercase like this? No. It's got to be uppercase like this, right? You would say, right? Now, is that enough like this? Or do I have to do this?
That.
What's it? Oh, okay.
Or square.
Okay, not square, it's this. So why, there's these two ways. Do they do anything different? That's the question I have to ask you. So what do I get when I have a usernames array as an example? How do I get that? Well, let's test this out. So let's do the first way. Actually, let's copy the line, and I'll comment it out here. So copy the line, paste the line, right? And then what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to comment this out. And up here, we're going to use the other way, right? So here's the first way that I talked about. Okay, cool. So we have an array, right, of usernames. What do I get on the console? So I do a console.log. Let's try this out. Console.log. Remember, this goes out to the console on your browser. And I want to put in the usernames variable in there, right? It looks like a usernames array. I should get something back. Let's see what I get back, right? Okay, so I've got my structure. We haven't really talked about this yet. And I want to run this thing. I want to see what my result is, right? Notice I haven't called any function or anything like that. I'm just writing along here in JavaScript, right? I have done a couple things on index.html. I have attached my JavaScript file on line 15. That's kind of important to do. If you don't do this, remember I told you that the index.html acts as a manifest that ties everything together, your CSS, other stuff, and JavaScript, right? Okay, so let's run this thing. And the way to do that, of course, in Visual Studio Code is right-click, and if you have a Mac, reveal in Finder. If you have a PC, reveal in Explorer. If I click onto this, it'll open up the file. My unstyled text, right, for us to look at. Okay, cool. And I want to right-click here, and I want to look at inspect. all right? And most browsers will give you most modern browsers give you an inspect. I want to click on console, and notice how I have an array, that's what it shows me here, of 0. And if I click the little arrow here, I get a property here, length, because all arrays have a length property or a way for us to count the number of elements in the array, right? And there's also something else here, a prototype with a bunch of other stuff. Woo! Where did this come from? Once you declare an array using my square brackets, an array is actually an object, right? So we'll talk about objects today as well. But I want you to think about it as packed full of extra information, and all you care about is the data so far that's stored inside. But it actually has a bunch of other kinds of methods, and these are all the methods that are linked to arrays. So if I look and say, well, if this is an array, the prototype for array, the object array, has concat, constructor, copy within, entries, every, fill, filter, all these different methods. These are all part of my array structure. Now, I'm not going to use these yet, but I just want you to know that these are all things that are part of every single array that are out there, right? Okay, let's just hide that again because it's ugly. Right? Well, if that's true, if I go back to Visual Studio Code, and if I go back to my app.js, then I should be able to do usernames down here before, before my console log. If I go usernames, right, and if I go dot, right, for most modern IDEs or text editors, it'll come up with a list of other possibilities, other things you can apply to your array, right? So notice I can do length, right? Array length. So my usernames dot length. So any array you can attach a dot length to. In other languages, it's dot count. In other languages, it's other things. But this is an actual value, right? So that means instead of doing, this is valid, right? And it's just kind of hanging out here. What if I want to print out usernames length in the console? So let's do that. So let's just get rid of this and put in usernames dot length. That's just one of the functions that we can access, the property. Okay, and that's what we get now when we go back to our browser. If I refresh, I get a number. I don't get the array. I don't get an array structure. I get the value back, right? Because that's what it's returning. It's returning a value of 0 because right now our array is empty, right? As we saw. So if I go back here, our array is empty. Therefore, when I do a usernames.length, the length property, which is associated with the array, any array, by the way, right? Showing us that, well, there's nothing in there, so it's got to be a length of 0, right? Okay, cool. I like that. So usernames works that way. So let's try it the other way. So I'm going to kind of go in here, and we're going to kind of comment this one out, put this one into play, and then take away the length property for a second, because just to explore what's going to happen, right? And I'll save that, and I'll go back out to the browser, and I'll refresh, and oh, look at this. It looks different, right? So before, when I used array, right? Let's go back here for a second. Right now, I'm using this. var usernames is a new array, right? Before, when I used this syntax, I got a whole array object. But here, with a new array, right, I'm getting something different here in the browser. And notice, you would think that you're getting the same, but I'm getting these square brackets, right? That's different, okay. Does that give me different options in my array? How come? Well, let's check this out. If I go back to my Visual Studio Code, and if I do the same thing, if I say usernames, right, dot length, well, no, I still get the same options, right? But on the browser, I don't get the same object. It's almost like it's returning only the array structure itself, which is showing right now 0, right? So you get a couple of different things going on with different uses. So they're the same in terms of declaration, but what you get feedback from the browser, back from the browser, you get a little bit more feedback when you use this structure compared to this structure. They're the same though in terms of usage. Okay, cool. Let's progress with the first structure, and we'll comment this one out. Okay, so we're just going to comment this one out, open this one up, get rid of this little space here, and I want to load up the array with some stuff, right? So a couple ways to do that. You can do it directly, like I said. So if we're going back to our example in Fireworks, if I want to put Mike, Rich, Andrew, and Margot, right, in the array, right, how would I do it? Try it yourself. I'll do it with me is what I'm saying. So see if you can do it, like how I'm going to be doing it, right? So what would you do? How about the girls in the back? I see some smiling, in the back. So maybe you guys are all cool with arrays. They're shaking their heads. So what would you do? If I want to assign a value, let's take a guess. If I want to assign a value to the 0th position of my array, remember my array, going back to my fireworks, describes just the username's variable itself, describes a big container with different compartments. If I want to put my Mike into my first compartment, which is the 0th compartment for all arrays in JavaScript, Java, C#, C-influenced languages, right? I'm going to use this syntax. Tell me what to type, right, here. What do I do? If I'm going to assign, just take a best guess. Don't worry. If you make a mistake, it's okay, and I'll come back to you. Any one of the girls in the back. Sorry? I like var, but we've already done var, right? Var is over here, so we already got a variable name for that. Okay, what's the next step? What else do we do here? So I'm going to start using the, like any kind of declaration or any kind of assignment, I need to make the assignment work. I need something, a variable name, the equal sign, and something to assign to it, right? So let's start with that. So we're going to assign it to usernames, right? So usernames. Now I need to use some notation. What else? What do I put there? So I want to put it in the first or 0th location. Square brackets 0. I like that. Equals to, and then in quotations, Mike, right? So let's do that. Mike. That's the first way. And if I was to check that now, let me just show you without doing anything else. If I see console.log, what I get, right, for arrays. If I go back here and refresh, right, notice how I get Mike, right? So square brackets Mike is in right here, right? So I want to fill it up with other things. And if we use the same methodology, right, I could do this. I'm just going to copy and paste here. So, to make these 4 positions, I could do something like this. 1, 2, 3. And then I could put the next usernames in order. If I was going to copy this, it's going to be Rich, Andrew, and Margot. Let's put that in. So Rich, Andrew, and Margot. Facebook. Why am I getting Facebook? All right, so Rich, Andrew, and Margot. And if I refresh, right? How about if I save first? Save, and then I go back and refresh, then I get a list like this. Mike, Rich, Andrew, Margot, right? So I get a comma-separated list of values, one value for each container location or compartment, if you will, right? We also call these compartments or locations inside of array elements, each element of the array, right? Some new terminology here. So if I go back, notice how I've assigned, this is the way we assign values to each of these things, right? And notice when I use the usernames, if I send usernames out to the console, so I'm taking usernames as the variable name and I pump it out to the console, right? I get a list, a comma separated list of all the elements of the array, right? If I want to have a specific, I want to read 1, right? Then I could just use 1. I could just take, let's say I want to only read usernames 2, right? So I'm going to take this one, and instead of usernames, I'm just going to replace that with usernames 2. That's perfectly legal too, right? Because I'm looking at the index 2 location. So the second, or actually it would be the 3rd compartment. I know it's a little bit confusing. And if we all started arrays at array 1 or like location 1, it would kind of cut down on some confusion for some people, right? But all C-influenced languages use zero-based array indexing, right? So we start off counting at 0, 0, 1, 2. So that's really the 3rd position, but it's the 2nd index, index 2, right? Okay, I'm going to get there. Notice how I haven't specified how big my array should be, right? In other languages, you have to specify at times how big is my array. I have to kind of like pre-allocate or reserve some memory for my array before I assign stuff to it. Not so in JavaScript, okay? So let's see what this does. If I want to, so we were expecting to see Andrew here coming up on the console. If I save everything and refresh, then all I see is Andrew. Notice there's no square brackets. I only get square brackets when I'm looking at the whole array, right? Typically, if I just get a value, it's just like looking at a variable, right? So because I'm specifically looking at that compartment inside the array, that element of the array. So I'm looking at this element, the 2nd element. So again, there's the 0th element, the 1st element, the 2nd element, the 3rd element. This 2nd element that I'm indexing with usernames, this syntax, usernames 2, gives me a value, just like I would normally get from another another variable of whatever I've stored inside. So in this particular case, I've stored Andrew, so I'm getting Andrew back, right? Okay, let's go back. I can also reassign stuff easily. They're not fixed. It's not like the array, their values inside the compartments are immutable. You can change what's inside of there. So if I go into, usernames, I go back to 0 as an example, and type Tom again, I'm overwriting what was already there. So first we assigned Mike, and we assigned everybody else, and then I assigned Tom in the same location. Well, it's just going to overwrite what's already there. It's going to take Mike out and put Tom in there. And notice if I was to look at, element 0, right, in my array now, I'll go back here and press refresh, I get Tom, even though at the beginning I had Mike assigned, right? Yes.
Why don't you copy line 20 after line 13, so output it twice, once after you assign it, Mike, once after
Sure, that's great. So let's do that. So that's great, Rich. So I'm going to put it here first. So here's my first output, right? And we'll make a little space here. And then I'm going to output it over here. So I assign it here, output it, and then I assign it here and output. It's the same location inside my array, right? This is an important distinction because people get messed up with this kind of stuff, right? Okay. I'm just saying. Refresh. So I get 2. I get Mike first and then Tom. It's the same location. I'm not pointing at a different compartment, right? Is that clear as mud in the back? Right? Okay. The reason why I'm starting slow like this with arrays is because, again, we use arrays to store data of different types. JSON data, string data. We can use arrays to store things from the document object model. All kinds of stuff we can store. And arrays don't just store strings. They can store any kind of data type. They can store numbers, strings, booleans. They can store, and in JavaScript, they can store objects, other arrays as well. That's where people get crazy messed up. Imagine like an array of arrays, right? That's a common thing we do in JavaScript. And it messes you up. How do you, how can you conceptualize a compartment of compartments, right? And there's ways we're going to show you how to do that here. But I'm mentioning it only because it can store a bunch of stuff. And here's what I can do with the array as well. Notice how I have Mike, Rich, Andrew, and Margot. And even though I've declared an array of usernames in, when I put this in, I could, which wouldn't make any sense, but I could do it, right? I could assign, instead of assigning Margot, I could assign the number 4, right? Or some other number. Let's put a number in there that's really weird, like 400, right? I could do that too, right? And that's perfectly legal in JavaScript. Here's the question for you though. Should I? What do you think? I can do it, but should I do it, right? And notice that when I hover over my usernames array, I get the type is any, and that's another data type in JavaScript, any, which means, in this particular case, an array, this container can store any kind of value. It doesn't have to be all strings. It doesn't have to be homogeneous this way, right? To say all strings or all numbers or all booleans. You can mix it up. But just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it. And I'm telling you right now, from a best practice perspective, this would be very bad, right? Because it doesn't make any sense that a usernames, the third slot in my usernames, or the fourth slot in this particular case, in my usernames array, has a value of 400. And it's a number, it's not even a string. Doesn't make any sense. You could do it, but we don't want to do it, okay? And I say that only because, I don't know where am I getting these things from. We can do it, and the reason why it's there is it produces a very flexible environment for us. But I always think about flexibility for young programmers, right? Flexibility is like a big noose that you can put around your head, right? And then it's nice, as an example, you can use the rope to swing with from building to building, and you can also kill yourself too, right? And I hate to say it in this way. I know it's kind of a bad analogy, but the way I look at it is, please don't hang yourself with the flexibility that JavaScript gives you. It's really bad, right, in some ways. So we don't have to even use strict wooden catches here, okay? An example of this is if I printed out underneath here, if I went to console.log, right? And again, you might not think this is an error. If you're a JavaScript developer, you might say, well, that's okay, Tom, because we use JavaScript for all kinds of stuff. Well, it's cool, but not in my world. We don't. We kind of try and stay, with what the meaning of the gist of what the username or the identifier is, right? All right, so pump this out and see what it looks like, right? So let's see the whole array. So here's my whole array. So Tom, Rich, Andrew, and then 400, right? It'll do it. Like it'll store it up and everything else, not a problem. Hey, here's something neat, right? I have a usernames structure here in the browser, and I want to add another value here in the browser. Can I do it in the browser? Like, can I modify my JavaScript on the fly like this? What do you think? The answer is yes, right? So if I go in here into the browser and I type in something like, console log, if I do something like this and I put in the usernames, look how it comes up. And I press enter, I kind of get that again, right? I can actually put in some commands, the same kind of commands that I can put in my text editor or IDE, I can put here, right? Don't worry about the undefined, right? Don't worry about that. That's just telling me that, hey, I don't know what that is. There's no value assigned to it here. But I can also do other things. I can also say something like this, usernames. Let's try this out. And instead of 0, 1, 2, 3, let's talk about usernames number 5. What if I do 5? Username's 5. That's kind of weird, like kind of an off number. And I want to assign this to, another user. And I even put a space in there as well. All right, here we go. And if I kind of console.log, right, usernames, right, now I get this. I get Tom, Rich, Andrew, 400, and then I get a 5 and a colon and another user. That's kind of weird too to look at, right? So what does all that mean, right? Well, that means that in order, when you see this thing, if you see this kind of output, it means the 0th element is Tom, the first element is Rich, the second element is Andrew, the third element is 400, which doesn't make any sense. There's no fifth element because 5 means 6. Give me a second here. So there's no fifth element, but then I'm specifying the 5th container, right, or 6th officially container. I got to specify because I'm skipping one. I'm going from 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's no 5, and I go to 6. That's what I'm doing here. Yes?
Does that only look at your browser, or does that update your JS?
It doesn't touch your JS file, right? So why would I do it here in the browser, you might say? Like, why am I doing it here in the browser? You can do some really simple tests here to change the effect of something that's on there, right? That's something that's physically in here altogether, right? So I can do some direct JavaScript and to test what's going on directly into the browser just by doing something in here, right? Okay, let's check this out again. So if I go back to here, Visual Studio Code, and what I've really done is do one of these. I said 1, 2, 3. I assign 0, and this is how it gets really messy. Here's usernames. Usernames 5. I don't have to do it in order, right? And this is where Andrew might cringe because in some other languages, you might have a problem with this, right? Usernames 5 is equal to, like I said, another user, something else, right? And I want to print out not just usernames, but also console.log. I want to see usernames 4, right? So what if I go in usernames 4? What would I get with usernames 4? You're going to get undefined. That's the right way. And when you say undefined, it means because we haven't really done anything with usernames 4. I haven't initialized usernames 4 in any way, right? By the way, this way that we're doing it is the long, ugly way of assigning values. To initialize the array in this way is really cumbersome. Can you think about another way of initializing, right, the array if I was going to attach values to it? This is one way. I could. That's the initializer methodology. We're going to talk about that in a second. So let's check this out first, and then I'll come back to the initializer. So I'll save the file. I'll go back to my browser here and refresh, and I get Tom, Rich, Andrew, 400, 5. So 5 indicating I'm looking at the 5th element here, and the last one, the 4th element, is undefined, right? Because I don't have a value for that. Notice it didn't appear here in the list as undefined. Actually, there's no value. It's actually nothing. Right? There is no value here. Until I assign it or until I reference it in some way, there's nothing. It's not even undefined, right? Okay, cool. So I need to know that. Okay, let's go back to our code for a second. So I talked about one way of initializing like this, right? Let's comment this way out. Okay, so we're just going to comment all these out, right, like this. And we'll keep this there so you can see it for your reference, right? And now I want to initialize the array, but I want to do it, actually, let's bring this over here for a second, and I'll kind of put it up here. I want to do it another way. I want to kind of do it up here, right, in one line. Let's try this. This is another way of initializing the array. So var usernames, right, and equals to, and then square brackets separated by commas, the stuff I want in there, like Mike, right? Rich, if I can type properly. Andrew. We'll put in, you know, instead of the last one will be Margot, because we'll go back to, you know, normal, right? And that's another way of initializing, right? So if I go and look at that, if I do a console.log with this one, right, I can use usernames, and you can see the value of that array in here as well. So let's look at that. So I'm saving this. So this is, I'm using my equal sign as an operator, the square brackets, and then I'm assigning values right away. Each value is assigned to its appropriate or respective location in order. So this would be the 0th value because it's the first one. This would be the first value because it's the second one. This would be the third value, right, and so on. And if you look at my map here that I'm showing you, right, it'd be the same thing. I'm doing these assignments. I'm assigning these values here, Mike, Rich, Andrew, Margot, as an example. But instead of it doing individually like this, right, I'm actually assigning them the other way. I'm assigning them all in one line. I can still reference them like this, one at a time, right? But I'm actually going through the list this way. Okay, let's see what I get on the browser. All right, so refresh. Yay, Mike, Rich, Andrew, Margot, right? It's the same thing. Okay. Questions around arrays so far? Okay. Very straightforward. Arrays, again, as a summary, are a group of it's one big container. If I have a variable name for the array that I'm creating, it's a variable name for the whole container structure, right? The empty array. And then each compartment in the array, or element, which is the right name to use, is its own container that can contain values, right? And the values can be different variables of different types if you really want them to be. Although we want to try, from the best practices and convention, we want to try and make one array hold one type of variable, even though you may see it online where they can hold different types, right? I want you to think about it as only using one type, number one. So again, either Boolean or number or string or whatever, right? That's two. The third thing is, you have to know about arrays, is that we use zero-based indexing, right? Where we count stuff with 0 starting off 0 and then moving forward in the array. So each element in the array starts off, we count it as 0. Think about these elements here as these are address numbers. So if this is a row of houses, this is another way to think about arrays, right? And these compartments, I have 4 houses on my street. My street is called usernames, right? 4 houses. The first house is house 0, right? And then house 1, house 2, house 3, right? But there's actually 4 houses. We just started counting with 0, right? I want to kind of keep giving you the analogy because it's going to mess you up soon, right? When I kind of go back to do some more complicated examples, it's going to mess you up. Okay, one more thinking of arrays. Can I, and this is a question for the programmers in the room, do you think we can specify a number or a size of my array in JavaScript? Can I do that? Can I specify, you know, that I want an array of 40 characters or 40 elements? Can I pre-allocate memory for an array in JavaScript? You're saying yes, right? You're saying yes. How would I do it? How would I pre-allocate memory or pre-allocate spaces if that's true, right? I'm assuming that you know how to do this. Can you do it, and what's the syntax? Right. Number in brackets, but if I put the number in brackets, I'm going to do that we just said. So I'm going to comment this out and then go back down here. And let's use the thing var usernames, right? And if I say the number in brackets, what am I really doing here? Am I specifying the size? I'm assigning the number 5 to the 0th location. So that's not the way to do it, right? Yes?
So it should be var username.
Oh, you mean that kind of notation. So var usernames like this, and then bracket here. So 5, right? And that, you think that would work, right? No, yeah, that's not going to work. I like your thinking though, right? But no, that's not going to work here in JavaScript. And the reason why we get into this is where the thing is, you really can't do it, right? If you can't pre-allocate here, right? JavaScript isn't like that. It's a dynamic language, right? Where we don't pre-allocate necessarily. It's kind of a just-in-time assignment from an array perspective, right? All right, one more thing before we break. So we've talked about creating arrays, first step to create an array is we initialize, we declare the variable name. By the way, you can do this in 2 steps, like we showed you, right? I can do var usernames, right, as an example. And let's just do that. I'll do it in 2 steps. So var usernames up here, bear with me while I retype everything, is equal to an array, right? And then I could say, well, usernames then is equal to this. I could break it up over 2 lines and do this later. I could totally do that, right? It's not a bad thing to do. And sometimes you might see that. I might pre-allocate this as an array and then initialize it later. So you can totally do that as well, right? Okay, cool. But what about if I want to add a value to the array? Because in JavaScript we have a thing that's a little different than in other languages. And even though our arrays are look like, we kind of visualize them like this, they're really not like this. And I don't want to confuse you, but I got to tell you this because you're going to see some stuff. If I use methods for my array, right? You have to understand they're really. I want you to, you can also think about it. I'm just going to try and see if I can do this visually. I want you to think about it like more like this. See how I'm separating them? Yeah. I'm separating them for a reason. So even though usernames is the big title for the entire array, right? Think about them as floating addresses. So on the street, where the person lives, there's no actual street. There's just a big pool of houses. All right? Seriously, I want you to think of it that way. It's a different analogy, right? A pool of houses, right? Or boats. That might be the better way. You have a big, I have a big pond, right? That's a better way of thinking. And each of these little containers, I'm just going to put them in different orders here, over here, and over here. I still need the addresses to kind of reference them, right? But instead of it being in an orderly fashion like this in a second, I want you to think about it. They're floating around for a second, right? Would that change the way we address them in any way? The answer is probably not. If they still have the address 0, 1, 2, they still need some way of addressing these things, right? I need to be able to access them. I need to be able to write to them. I need to be able to read from them. So I need some kind of 0-based indexing to get to them, right? That's what I need to do. But if you think about it like this, right? That means that I can look inside of the array. I can access a single house, or I can, and we haven't talked about deletions yet. I can actually go in and delete an element, and I can insert an element. And that speaks to me that array in JavaScript isn't just an array, like a big structure like this, but can also be treated as a list, right? Which is kind of really powerful, right? That means all arrays in JavaScript are also lists, okay? If you take that into your mind, and who knows what a list is compared to an array? That might be a different thing. Does anyone know? Oh, so no one knows. A couple people might know what a list is compared to an array. So what's in a list compared to an array? Well, I'm gonna kind of pause after this one. Pause for kind of a break to get a bio break and take a break from this brain-numbing stuff, right? So a list is a collection, all right, which is a little different than an array structure, all right? Let me just put these back in order for a second. Just undo those things, right? So again, see how they're loosely connected, right? I want you to think about the array in order like this, right? But it's a list here, a list of usernames, right? As opposed to just a bunch of houses or containers, right? If I can add to the list and I can remove stuff from the list without changing the existing list values or their positions necessarily, right? How do I do that? If I add to the list in another language, who knows C#, Java, another language, Python, something else? Okay, how would I add, lists in C#, Java? How do I add to a list in those languages? Anyone? Yeah, push. That's the same method we use here, right? So I can use the push method, right? So example would be, and here's another little notation. I'm going to write this out for you, right? So this is the way we access it. But I can also do one of these. I can say usernames dot push, and then the value that I want to push to it. For example, I want to push in, a value of Tom, right? Okay, cool. So I take this, and I'm going to put this over here. If I use this notation, usernames push Tom, what am I doing? Where is it going? Where is this value going to go? I didn't pre-allocate a location. I haven't specified a spot. Where do you think it's going to go in this context? Yes. Number 4. It's going to actually push it to the bottom of the list. Think about it. It's going to just slap it onto the bottom, right? It's going, hey, let's slap the bottom of the array, right? And I want you to think of it like that because every time you add or push the value on, and you guys are smiling, you know, you kind of slap on another value onto the bottom of. I want to remove a value. If you're, you know collections. How do I remove a value? Pop, pop, push, right? Where does the pop come from? Is it the bottom again, or is it the front? The last element. So I can add, to the array, the last element to the array by using push, and I can remove the last element. Let's try this out by using pop, right? But I don't need to use the word Tom. I'm not specifying what I'm popping. I just want to use the pop method, right? But in this particular case, when I use push or pop, for pop, it actually returns a value, right? So I can actually assign this, the pop. I'm just going to pull this over so you guys can all see this, right? There we go. Oops, I don't want to look at that one. So here's my usernames, right? I can assign this to a variable. So I can say, okay, username's pop, and assign this value to something else. So I can do something like this. I can say, if I have let's suppose I have a variable that I've defined called my string, right? I can make it equal to username's pop. I'm running out of room here. Username's pop, whatever it is. It's going to take the last username, in this particular case Margot, and assign it to my string. And it's going to remove it from the array. I'm actually physically taking this element, effectively, if it's the last element, and going like this. Boop, it's gone. Right? When I pop, if I push, boop, it goes back on. Right? It kind of gets added to the end of the array. So every time I push an element, it goes to the bottom. And let's just change this to, from a context perspective, to Margot instead of Tom. Well, let's suppose we don't have Margot in there yet, right? We only have 3 elements to the array. Oops. 3 elements to the array here, right? And then I use the push, it goes on, whoop, it kind of adds on. And when I pop, I say my string pop, I pop Margot back off, and it goes into it becomes, this value gets assigned to my string. There'll be another variable that this value comes into, becomes a value, and gets assigned to that variable. All right.
Say my.
Hmm?
Do you have to write my string?
No, it's just a variable name that I made.
Oh.
Right. My string is just a variable identifier, right? All right, so that means that if I do this in practice, right, so let's try this out. So here's Mike, Rich, Andrew, Margot, and I want to add Tom in there. So I can say usernames, right, dot push. And notice it gives me a method, and it asks me for something. It says in here, I need to push something onto it, an item onto the array. And it tells you what it does here too. It says appends new elements to an array and returns the new length of the array, right? That's what it does. So it actually returns a value too. So I'm going to say push, and I want to add in there Tom, right? So there's my new item that I'm adding in, right? So let's try this out. So if I do console.log after I push, all right, so here's usernames, right? And let's do this. Let's add some other stuff. We'll concatenate the things. So before the push, right, plus usernames. And here's after the push, right? Plus usernames, right? So here's what the array looks like before the push, and here's what it looks like after the push. And then I'll upload this to GitHub in a second, right? And create the GitHub repository for you, which we'll do before the break. Okay, so let's see what we get. So if this is true, look at the notation I'm using. I'm using the plus operator to concatenate the string plus the value that I'm getting from my usernames together to output to the console. That's what I'm doing here, right? The plus operator is a concatenation, right? It takes 2 strings and puts them together. If the other object is not a string, it converts it into a string. Okay, that's what it does. Be careful of that. All right, cool. So let's take a look and see what we've got. So I refresh, and I say before the push, my values are Mike, Rich, Andrew, and Margot. After the push, my values are Mike, Rich, Andrew, Margot, and Tom, right? And let's do a pop, just one more example, right? So we're going to pop, right? And we'll say usernames pop, right? Now notice I could do it just like this, usernames pop, right? And I don't have to assign it anywhere, but I could. So I can say console.log. This is valid, by the way, after the pop, right? Plus usernames. All I'm saying is show me the usernames after the pop. Show me the usernames array after the push and so on. Okay, so these are the different operations I'm doing. I'm doing an operation that's adding an element. So I'm going to add, here's my comments, add an element to the bottom of the array, right? And here's remove an element from the bottom of the array, right? Oops, bottom of the array, right? So add an element, remove an element. And this is assign, initialize the array with values. That's what this is, right? So a bunch of values get added into the array, okay? And we'll just space this down so that the stuff that we commented out before is still there, but we're just going to space it so they don't see it in our code like this. Okay, cool. Let's save everything. And we're going to go back to our browser and test it. So boom. So before the push, Mike, Rich, Andrew, and Margot. After the push, Mike, Rich, Andrew, Margot, and Tom. After the pop, Mike, Rich, Andrew, and Margot, back to what it was before. So I'm pulling and pushing back on the bottom of the array. Is this clear for everybody? So all I'm doing is manipulating data. So there's two things I can do, right? I can there's a couple ways I can add or remove elements on the array. And notice that when I concatenated the data, remember I told you that it would convert the output into a string. That's what I've done here. Let's make this a little bit better. So, when I have a string plus another value, right? My usernames, I convert this value into a string. If I was to just console.log usernames, I get a different output, right? Like, and I'll show you that. If I go back to here, and if I go console.log, and I put usernames in there, usernames, right? Then I get this notation, square brackets. That's returning the array, right? But if I add, if I do a console.log with a string, and I use the plus operator to concatenate these two things together, the output is a string. An example of that would be this, so console.log, and then my users plus usernames, right? And if I do that, I get an uncaught exception. How about an error? How about the error that I made? Finger typing errors, Tom. My users, I love finger typing errors. It just makes me crazy. Plus username. Right? So I get this, and notice how it's different. It looks different. This looks very different than this, as it should, because this is returning the array and the values that are inside the array, and this is returning a string. Even though it looks like they're the values of the array, but they've been converted to a string. This is a key thing to understand whenever we use console.log. And it's a key thing to understand when I pump things out to the DOM, to the document object model. When I send things back out to the browser, because we haven't done that yet, right? It converts everything into a string. I want you to think about this. And the same thing goes on the other way around. If I read something from my web page, every time I read a value, I want you to think about that incoming value as a string that I'm going to have to convert into a number if I got to do some calculations. If you think about it that way, right, you'll never get into trouble. So if I'm writing or reading something from the web page, assume automatically it's a string. Actually, that applies even to mobile development, right? If I'm building an Android or I don't know, iOS app, the stuff I'm taking in, doesn't matter whether I type in a number or a letter, it's incoming to me. Even on Windows, if you build something with Windows, whatever, when you do rapid application development with Andrew, as an example, anything you write inside that, in the fields, in a form, are incoming to you as a string. You should always think of it like that. And I always got to do some kind of conversion if I want to do some kind of calculations, okay? And the same thing goes out. When I pump it out, it becomes a string, okay? Let's take a short break, and when we get back, right, I'm going to get you guys to do some operations. Do you have a question, or are you just stretching? Stretching? Okay. Yes.
This in the browser.